I want us to get to the epiphanies before we run out of time. By definition, an epiphany is a moment of sudden revelation or insight. It's a thing that comes to you from beyond you. Does that make sense? Okay? So you don't know how you got it. And it could be through somebody else, or you're reading a book, or you're hearing a speaker, or you're listening to a song, you're watching a movie. When my brother-in-law died at 32 from liver cancer, he left my sister a widow with a 2-year-old and a 7-month-old. And I was assigned to be the pastor to help both families go through this, my family and the G family. And I remember at the funeral, I mean, this is a tragic funeral where you're seeing this, you know, these 2 little babies and my sister who's just lost the love of her life. And so I'm looking out and everyone's in just abject grief. And I'm feeling my own grief. It's just like welling up, welling up, welling up. And I'm like, if I lose it, then we're not going to get through this funeral, right? There's just no way this is going to happen. And so I remember taking this huge breath and swallowing my grief. It was just like, I cannot participate in this. I have this role, okay? Well, what I realized is I had to swallow my grief so deeply, I couldn't find it back. Okay, so 3 years later, Snoopy and I went to Blockbuster. This is really dating me. And we rented the VHS tape of Places in the Heart with Sally Field, right? And John Malkovich and the African-American actor is amazing. You know, he's a big guy, right? So I'm watching this movie because I heard it was a good movie. I think someone got an Academy Award. And near the end of the movie, the story is there's this young mother of 2 little kids, and her husband's the sheriff in this little agricultural town, and he gets killed in some random shooting, and now she's left. She's about to lose the farm. And so the local bank, there's some contest that they have every year that she never paid attention to, that whoever brings in the first harvest of cotton is actually going to win this cash prize. And it happens to be the exact amount that she owes the bank, right? But it's just her and her little kids, and she's never, and if you've ever picked, I mean, cotton is nasty stuff. And she ends up finding this blind guy played by John Malkovich, who he supports himself by recaning chairs. And this African-American guy who's he's the one that actually understands how to bring in the cotton. And somehow they brought this whole thing together, and she's about to give up, right? It's like all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden at the end of the movie, when she's winning the prize, I'm bawling. I'm just like, I can't control my crying. And the epiphany was, this was the grief that I swallowed 3 years ago. And the reason why it came out in this moment is because I'm projecting my sister into the Sally Field character, right? And I'm just seeing all of them, even though it wasn't on the farm, even had nothing to do with cotton, you know, but it's just like, wow. And so I wasn't looking for that. I wasn't expecting it. But that was one of those moments where I go, oh, it was so good to finally grieve, because I loved him too, right? I missed him too. So that's where I think an epiphany is really a gift. All right, so we're going to be back on our sheets. The latter half of each of the sheets talks about the epiphanies. And I think this is really significant. Now, again, this is the stuff that Ryan came up with as I asked him these questions. What epiphany would a beaver have? And I think, Ryan, you were spot on. To have a pious and devout, hardworking beaver come to understand, so this is the epiphany. To come to understand that people have value to God even if they're not on the straight and narrow path. That the value in humans is really intrinsic because all humankind was created in God's likeness. Therefore, to be self-righteous would be ridiculous because a beaver doesn't have any more value than the person next to him or her. Okay? So that's there on page 2 at the bottom.
So that would manifest in a church where if there were a lot of beavers and they actually were on the straight and narrow, let's assume, they wouldn't expect people to be perfect like they might be perfect. And that they would incorporate them into the church because they realize that there's skill sets that they may have, such as leading worship, such as maybe even speaking, such as leading Sunday school.
Yeah, so on a deeper level, it says a beaver might realize that constantly focusing on being righteous can be fruitless when they themselves have committed a major transgression. Would this have to be something concrete, like a beaver actually has a failed marriage? Or could a beaver experience this internally as a result of realizing that he's a self-righteous Pharisee? Okay, so remember, an epiphany is not something we can generate ourselves, but I think this is something that God would want every beaver to have this experience because it's humanizing, right? And I think it's not like, okay, so in order for a beaver to have this epiphany, they have to go out and kill somebody, or they have to embezzle money from the church. That does happen, and sometimes that's where the self-righteous beaver all of a sudden is like, wow, my marriage failed. I never thought that I would be party to a failed marriage, right? Or my kid went prodigal. I raised them in the church. I said, do all the right things. And now not only are they not going to church, they're doing horrible things, right? That's really humanizing. And then hopefully that's going to help them get in touch with everybody else. But at the same time, I think it can happen internally, where you say, even if I never do anything bad or none of my kids go prodigal, I'm not perfect. So, and part of how I'm not perfect is how prideful I am about being so close to perfect, right? And so having that internal conversation is another way that God can bring about this epiphany. Again, this is a moment where you're brought to your knees, where God says, okay, I really want to talk to you about this. What type of epiphany would a beaver have? Let's see, what type of mentor? A fox would be an ideal mentor because a fox would teach a beaver to be flexible and tolerant, while at the same time teaching a beaver how to have fun in ways that could still be responsible. And then I like how does a beaver know that God is really God talking to them? The challenge will always revolve around forgiving and loving people who don't deserve to be forgiven or loved. This might mean forgiving a stranger or loved one, but it also might mean forgiving themselves. So obviously this is true for everybody, but it's especially true for beavers who pride themselves, like the older brother, on always following the rules, always doing the right things, and basically you get what you deserve. If there's a T-shirt that the beaver wears, it's like everyone gets what they deserve. So if you get bad, because you deserve that, and I should get good because I deserve that. And it's like, well, if we put that on expectation of God and the gospel, do you think as a beaver you really deserve God's love and His grace and His mercy and salvation? And somebody's like, yeah. And it's like, no. All right. And again, that's like the crushing, bringing you to your knees, like, oh my gosh, look what I've done with this, right? Look what I've done with the gospel. Okay, why don't you take me through this part?
Okay, so the fox, when it goes through its epiphanies, I talk about it being one epiphany, okay? And this is what a fox hitting the rock bottom in terms of being hedonistic and succumbing to his life's pleasures. But also on a higher level a fox may also have an epiphany when they're reckless. That's really what most higher level foxes, they come to Jesus moment, right? When they made a big mistake. And they're reckless because they think they're better than they really are. They don't understand the value in hard work and discipline. And so when I think of the ADAP people coming here, they might think, they may think this is not for them. Church is not for them because church is telling them what not to be. But from what I've gathered from our messages, when they come to our church, it's not about rejecting them. It's about accepting them. And can you speak as to that, how they feel?
Yeah, I think the turning point for any recovering addict is to actually hit your bottom, okay? And what that means is that you realize that you're not helping, you're hurting. Like everything that you're doing, you're basically not moving towards a solution, you're actually creating more of a problem. And if you're a recovering addict, if you ever had to work with them, that's the hardest point, is to get them to realize, right, that the bottom is their place. That's where the turn can happen. And you know, in a spiritual sense, what we would say, and I think they would say this too, they don't necessarily put religion on it, is like they find spirituality, they find God at the bottom. Okay? So, remember in the story of the prodigal son, we said the prodigal son is actually a fox? So where did he start having his moment of realization, his come home moment? Was when he was homeless, and he was eating the food that was being, you know, slopped to the pigs, and he's like, oh my gosh, right? Like even the hired hands eat better than this. So even if I've completely ruined my chance to be a son anymore, like I'm better off going home. Yeah, I'll face the music. I'll you know, deal with my shame. So I think it's important to walk with a fox long enough for them to hit that place. Right? And I think that the tendency, especially if you're a beaver, is to give up on the fox, right, too soon. Or if you're a dolphin, is to still, like, you know, you're still doing this. I mean, that was my struggle in standing in front of these, you know, drug addicts. Everyone says, I'm talking these big ideals about God and the gospel, and they're like,
what about me?
Yeah, what about me? I mean, have you ever killed anybody? You know, have you ever ruined every life you've ever touched? It's like, what is really, you know, good news for me? And they were just forcing me to come out of the clouds and to come down and say, yeah, what does this really look like? Right?
The reason why foxes hit rock bottom in this hard fashion, in my opinion, is because they're pretty optimistic about what they're doing until they really screw up. If you're wondering how athletes can do this miraculous drive or make this shot at the end of the game, is it because they're thinking about them missing? Chances are they're thinking about everything going well. So they don't have that self-reflection, and they don't think about how lack of discipline has hurt them. And so when they make a huge mistake, they have to make a mistake big enough where they can't cover up anymore. They have to make a mistake where, oh my God, I can't even hold a job anymore because I take so much drugs that I can't go to work anymore. You know, that would be a situation like I have no control over myself. I don't even see the light at the end of the tunnel. I just see a cave, actually. I don't see any light at the end. I just see a cave, and that's when I need help.
Yeah, so again, think about functioning as a faith village, as a church community, is like, do we have the faith and the love to walk with those foxes through all of the avoiding the bottom, right? All that kind of stuff. And then usually the answer is no. Okay? And that's where I think God has the foxes in our midst. Yeah?
With the foxes, it's kind of making it sound like they are like the ones that are addicts and like the crazy ones. What would it look like for maybe someone who's not that extreme? Like a fox is not that extreme.
What would it look like? Oh, a fox would go to church and not do anything for the church. Sing songs and leave.
No, but she's saying in a that still sounds negative.
Oh, in a positive way? What could
Yeah.
Positive, but even just like
I thought you meant
bring them to their knees. Like maybe not every fox is going to be a drug addict.
Sure, absolutely.
So what would maybe be an example?
They might feel hopeless going to a church that has no change and no stimulation for them. And they feel like, why am I here? That would be a little more of an end type of struggle, a more intuitive type of struggle. And so that's why they would have to deal with it longer, because it wouldn't dawn on them immediately. But after a few years, they'll be like, I'm not giving anything. The church is not giving me anything. And you know, then that depression might sit in there.
Well, I would think too, like, let's just take it out of the church. It's a family. You have a fox kid, and they're a teenager. Oh boy, right? So they think you're the most boring people, you know, as their parents, all this kind of stuff. And you're looking and like, you're just going to have an accident. You're just, you know, that's reckless. That's taking too many risks. And at some point, I think, and you can't make it happen, but they come to their senses and they go, wow, you know what? My family does love me. And they're not just boring. Like, they're looking out for my best interests. Yeah.
So are foxes like innovators? So
Yeah.
They tend to be the artisans. They tend to be they're pursuing something that's fun, and so they're creating something along the way. So they tend to be risk takers because
Yeah.
they're optimistic. That
Entrepreneurs.
They're entrepreneurs because they're following something that's enjoyable and is cool and fun and all that.
Right.
For people that are kind of,
So keep on talking, but I'm going to interject one little point. She says fun and enjoyable, but let's add in there, along with that, high stimulation. Something of a high degree of difficulty. Back to church plants. And so you're saying?
like you said before, CEOs of companies usually tend to be, they're risk takers. And so they assume that it's going to be successful. So, youth ministry folk, I think, or youth advisors, or people who really want to bring in this fullness of life, foodies, and all the things that they bring. And they're always constantly finding things. So they bring just freshness and color and vibrancy and spiritual, the quest for spiritual enlightenment or highness or whatever, right? Is that kind of...
I think Foxes, their influence on the church would be a more welcoming church. Whereas the Dolphins would be a doctrine where it's theoretically, oh yeah, we're coming together and this is great because we're founded in their ideologies. And then a Beaver Guardian would be founded in security and regularity and something to, like some standard in which to go by. Like Foxes really make it a more welcoming, enjoyable environment that we all hope church to be. And yet when we're trying to make church in our own image, if you're not a Fox, it ends up being not enjoyable as it could be than if we were to incorporate Foxes.
All right, Rosie, you had your hand up.
Well, if I'm hearing the question correctly, is it more like, what's an example of a successful Fox? As opposed to, is that what I'm hearing? So I'm thinking, like yesterday I was listening to the radio, and I think it was Family Focus or something, and so the speaker was a Christian, I think he was an R&B artist, and he was a great speaker, and he was talking about how he's got tattoos, and he's an artist and all that, and so I'm thinking, that could be...
Sure.
Right,
well, like you said, that's
successful Fox.
Yeah, and that's why they're the artisan. But I think what comes with the Fox totem is that when it's not stimulating, they have a hard time sustaining, right? And so rather than set the Fox up to fail eventually when this thing doesn't have enough infrastructure, doesn't have enough sustainability, instead of just waiting for them to crash and burn, it's like, no, the loving thing to do is to say, hey, so you're the catalytic agent. You're the one that really helps things that need to get done. But we need to start surrounding you with the people that you need so that either you don't have to worry about some of these things, or that when you're ready to move into this next chapter, that we're not going to close the first one necessarily. Right. So, yeah, I think entrepreneurs in general are Foxes, and thank God for that, right? Because you need to get new things started.
They get it done.
Yeah, but I know a lot of pastors who they ended up being church planters, and they spend all this time getting the first group of people to go with them. And they leave all their friends, all that kind of stuff. But then what they and their followers don't get is that they're more of a Fox, and so at some point they lose interest. And then all these people are like, hey, it's like, what do you mean you're leaving us? We left everything. It sounds like the disciples of Jesus. We left everything to follow you, and now you're going on to something else. It's like, well, could that have been prevented if they kind of all were more honest about what they bring, what they don't bring, and they say, hey, we still believe that you're supposed to pastor us, but we also know that you need certain things to be different in order for you to still stay, in this whole mix. How was a fox going to know if it's God really talking to them? A fox would likely know if God's speaking to them if God asked the fox, this is on page 5, to commit to a long-term goal or a life journey that requires the naturally carefree fox to be disciplined and to work hard. So again, all of these kind of God moments are as when God's telling whatever totem you are something that you naturally don't think like you wouldn't naturally choose this. And again, that's going into conflict. That's choosing something hard because God has something to teach us. Okay, a dolphin. The Epiphany is an experience where a dolphin would be put on the spot to perform. They need to be called out at some time in their life, and perhaps it's a single mentor is requesting that the dolphin steps into the shoes of a bigger role, or perhaps it's a community or a family Or it may also be in rare cases where the dolphin realizes that she or he is the only person who can get the job done. Okay?
We actually talked about this last month, and Jason gave an example of a spiritual leader. It was Moses, and I envision Moses to be ENFP dolphin. And what was Moses's? What was his hesitancy?
I'm not good enough.
But why was he not good enough? Exactly, why?
Can't speak.
He can't speak! God chose him anyway, right? And that's like the dolphin's journey to like, oh, I'm not good enough. It's like, actually, you are good enough, and go ahead and do it. You know, get out of the fold, and we want you to keep moving along. They're always going to feel a little uncomfortable because they want to know their place. But at some point, dolphins, you need to create your space. Oh, I wish the camera was videotaping you. What was, Tina?
Oh, Tina.
Tina, I just punched you in the nose there with my verbal jab. What was your reaction? Why did you have that look?
Because I'm often questioning like, oh, what is my role here?
Yeah, right? Dolphins, you have an ability, create your space. Create your space.
What does that mean? What do they mean, create your space? What does that mean?
Create your role. Create your role in society, in your church. And don't worry so much about always being that cooperator following along because it's done this way. You could say, hey, I have this ability. It's not necessarily, or I have this thought or ideology, and I need to share it with the world. So Ken, it's easier for Ken to do because this is Evergreen is his church. He's a senior pastor, so he could say whatever he wants to say. But
within reason.
Yeah. But if he wasn't there, you know, he could be nudging people along, like, you know, Mary and Martha was nudging him along too, and that way they're making their space, their ideologies being made known. So don't be quiet all the time.
Well, you know, I'm in this other space now that's brand new to me. It's academic. I'm sitting with provosts and deans and presidents and all that stuff. And I do have this dolphin cycle now that hasn't been happening here for years. Like, do I belong here? Like I'm coming in from a side door, and I've got a title now that I'm still trying to figure out what does that look like, and you know, is this actually a good fit for me? I mean, all those kind of things. And I find that when I'm into that internal not decompressing. It's almost like I'm invalidating myself that I'm not saying anything in the meeting, right? And then I have this other voice, because I've gone through this. I was on the board of trustees for InterVarsity. There's all these rich white people, right? And I was like, I can't write big checks. I'm not, right? And so then I don't say anything. And then I realize the other voice says, but then why would they invite you to be at this meeting? They know you're not rich. So they still think there's a valuable contribution you're supposed to make. What is it? I found a way to decouple that. And it takes me a while. And so this latest thing at Fuller is a brand new challenge. And I find myself, why am I doing this? Because I could just wait out my days here at Evergreen, where I know this place, right? You know my voice, all that stuff. It's like, because I think God has something greater for me, that not greater than being pastor of the church, but I'm supposed to now equip this next generation. And it's much more strategic than just planting one church, right? It's just like all this kind of stuff. So as I've had this conversation with myself, sitting in these meetings saying nothing, if you can imagine that, then all of a sudden I'm starting to say something, right? And I'm speaking with a new voice that is appropriate to, and I find out, I keep waiting for them to be like, really, you said that? No, it's like, oh, good, that's how executive director talks, right? And you know, it's like, oh, yes, yeah, by all means, yeah. Yeah, no, and it's funny. So I'm being honest with you. I'm saying even at this late stage in the game, because of my dolphin-esque sort of thing, I find myself almost taking myself out even as I'm entering. And it's just like, again, unless they're total ignoramuses, they wouldn't have asked me to do this if they didn't see something. So that whole thing is mentoring me, right? The whole school is Obi-Wan, right? And so it's like, no. So if you show up and you don't contribute, I mean, when I was asked to do the Urbana Bible expositor thing back in 2000, I was literally having panic attacks after I agreed to do it because I don't read a manuscript. And everybody that had done it before me just gets up there and reads this really dense academic manuscript. And so I was freaking out. And I was like, I'm going to fail. I'm not going to be what people have heard in the past. Blah, blah, blah. And so I finally told, at the speaker's retreat, I told the two directors of that event, I said, I'm going to be honest with you, I am freaking out. I'm literally waking up with chest pains in a cold sweat. I wish I had never said yes to this. Right? Here's my assignment. You have to go through the whole Bible in 5 22-minute talks. Yeah. And so they said, okay, time out. They said, look, all right. So, we looked all over the world and we had a pool of 50 people. So again, they're reinforcing why they picked me. I go, yeah. And they go, and so we all listened to all the other people and we decided it's you. Okay? So we picked you for a reason because you don't do it like everybody else. And so if you freak out and don't tell us and you show up as a Chinese imitation of John Stott, right? And it's just like you completely negated the reason why we picked you. Okay? I was like, oh, so they said, we not only give you permission, we want you to do it the way you do it because that's why you were picked. And he says, now, one of our executive vice presidents, who's a friend of yours, he said, I think Ken's a great pick, but just out of curiosity, who was the second and the third pick? He goes, Ken, and Ken. And so I think I don't know if that was true or not, but I think they knew that I was about to freak out, right? That I was about to take myself out of that whole opportunity because I said, I'm not the one, okay? And so by saying, Ken, you're the first, second, and the third choice, we cleared the decks of everybody else once we actually figured out that it was you. I mean, that may sound like overkill, but man, did I need that at that time because I'm speaking to 20,000 people, right? And in an environment that was completely foreign to me. So I'm telling you, that's not a one-time deal for us Dolphins. That you're going to find yourself in a marriage, right? You're going to find yourself as a parent. You're going to find yourself in a new job situation, a different friends group, and you are going to be good at talking yourself out of actually being there and contributing what God has given you to contribute.
That's a nice story because that would never be an owl's problem. I would be like, but do I want to do this? Are people worthy to hear what I have to say?
Oh, wow.
One thing I want to add to what Ken said, and this is an epiphany I just had right now about dolphins. You know God's calling you when what you have to say, and it's usually what you have to say because it has to do with your ideologies, will shake things up and cause the group to come together. That's when you know. And I was talking to Ken in the car. I was like, what you did was great at Evergreen. It was actually like genius. And of course, there's other people supporting too. And what they did was genius too. But what's genius about it is not that things changed. Changing things is not hard. I could change things all the time. But if to see a church heal and grow, that's like a true dolphin ability. And that's when you know that God's calling you to do something because you know that small shakeup will be, or the shakeup will be small in comparison to the benefit of the group coming together.
Oh, so you're talking about the CDP and that whole thing?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's affirming. I need to hear that more than you realize. More than I realize. Yeah. No, I mean, one of the things we just got engaged and we were at family camp at Canyon Meadows. And so we're off in the moonlight talking. Somehow you find a moment to do that. And so she says, a lot of people are going to love you for what you can do for them, but I'm going to love you for who you are. Right? And I was like, man, I made a good choice. Because there is that insecurity that's built in. So what if I can't give you what you expect from me? Right? In whatever situation. And again, I think everyone has that question, but apparently not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The dolphins need that most affirmation and validation because they're always like preaching their thoughts. I'm like, am I even saying the right things? And so it may think that they always have ego. They might project ego, and they're projecting ego because you don't want to project weakness. But inside, like, they need to be filled up so that they can keep on having energy to speak out and speak their thoughts.
Yeah. Okay.
So just curious, Ken, what is Snoopy?
She's my wife. we've been talking about this, Ro. Yeah, she's like a dolphin owl.
And I liken her to, if she could very well be a, you know, have you heard of those fish in the sea where if you put all male fish together, like one becomes a female?
Yeah, they can change their sex.
Yeah. And so if you put two personality types, so oh, two dolphins, they're like fish, kind of. They're in the water at least. And like one of them will be more logical just because one of them's so feeling. Ken is feeling. So I think over the years.
Hypothetically.
So she might be testing more thinker because Ken is testing more feeling. She's balancing out the relationship. It almost has to be like that where one person changes if you don't normally have that balance in a relationship.
I mean, I had dated instinctively. I was always attracted to more dolphin women, and they were great to be with in the dating moment. Then I would have this epiphany. It's just like, we can't both be this. Right? So it's like, without having, again, this terminology, it's like, I need someone who balances her checkbook. You know? like, wow, I find that really attractive. Yeah. Well, and so it's kind of it's like the filling out of the picture. But I think that comes with maturity, hopefully. Okay.